Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The compound was always noisy. Children chasing chickens, neighbors exchanging gossip, and the rhythmic clang of someone pounding yam in the backyard. Yet inside the small bungalow at the edge of that lively street, a different kind of noise reigned. Arguments came in waves, subtle and tense, like storm clouds gathering above a quiet sea. Robin and Marcus were two of 6 children, born just a year apart, but their closeness was more weapon than bond. Even as children, they seemed too comfortable with chaos. They would knock over water pots and blame the dog, sneak coins from their father's trouser pocket, and watch quietly as he turned the house upside down searching. And through it all, their mother, Mama Ejiro, would shake her head with a soft chuckle and say, "They're just boys. Let them be." Their father, however, didn't laugh. Pa Ogading believed in order, in structure, in punishment. His cane was swift, and his rules were clear, but it only earned him the title of the Wicked One, both in his home and in the mouths of neighbors. Robin, the more daring of the two, had a spark in his eyes that could charm or burn, depending on the day. Marcus was quieter, but his silence wasn't innocence, it was calculation. Together they learned how to bend rules without appearing guilty, how to wear the skin of obedient sons when it suited them. The house was too crowded for close attention, and Mama Ejiro's love was blindfolded by bias. She saw only the best in her boys, often scolding the others for snitching, for making noise about little things. Their father would come home after long hours at the market stall, tired and grim, only to find a plate shattered or a neighbor at his gate complaining. His response was always the same, a firm grip on his belt and a voice that made the roof tremble. But what he couldn't beat out of them was the silence that followed, thick, resentful, and unspoken. Robin and Marcus never cried. They just waited for the storm to pass, then whispered and laughed once the door closed. By the time they were teenagers, the pattern had hardened into something almost cultural in the home. Their older siblings left early, moving out as soon as life gave them an opening. Their younger ones tiptoed, watching and learning which corners to avoid and which moods to mimic. And yet, in Mama Jiro's eyes, her boys could do no wrong. When neighbors whispered about missing slippers, when teachers complained about stolen pens and sudden fights at school, she folded her arms and asked why everyone was always pointing fingers at her sons. Pa Ogading grew quieter with the years, withdrawing into himself, sensing he was outnumbered even in his own house. What was once discipline had turned into defeat. And while Robin and Marcus stood at the edge of manhood, something darker began to stir beneath their mischief, something that wasn't just about being boys anymore. The boys grew into their boldness the way a thief grows into the night, without apology, without fear. At first, it was simple things, sneaking into the market to snatch plantains from the old women who dozed off under the midday heat, slipping into unguarded yards to uproot cassava or steal plump chickens. Their faces, still young enough to be called children, shielded them from real suspicion. Robin, with his sly grin, always led the plans, while Marcus, sharp-eyed and quieter, executed them with frightening precision. They learned how to run through alleyways where even policemen rarely ventured. They mapped the rhythms of the town, the hours when traders were busiest, when neighbors locked their doors, when the streets yawned empty under the sleepy afternoon sun. And slowly, their games grew teeth. They began carrying blades tucked inside their pockets, not to use, but to flash when someone dared resist. At home, their mother still cooked their meals with a smile. Their siblings avoided them with tight lips, and their father, shoulders heavy with invisible stones, said little but watched everything. Their hunger for more intensified when they found others like them, boys who had tasted the sour-sweet fruit of quick money and didn't care about the bitterness that followed. Together, they formed a loose gang, stitched together by greed and daring, operating like smoke, hard to catch and harder to hold. They would ride commercial buses across town pretending to be passengers, and then at sudden stops lift wallets and phones before disappearing into the thick crowd. Their laughter echoed in the back streets as they celebrated each small triumph, tossing money into games of cards or wasting it on cheap thrills. Robin thrived in this world where being cunning was currency, while Marcus became more withdrawn, his smiles fewer, his silences heavier. They avoided getting caught not by luck, but by cold calculation. Every move was rehearsed, every risk measured, and still their world at home remained untouched by consequence. Their mother saw only the food on the table, never asking where it came from. Their father, seeing the changes he could no longer fight, withdrew deeper into a bitterness that only silence could carry. As weeks blurred into months, the street began to wear new colors. Stories of break-ins multiplied. Motorcycles went missing from compounds, and handbags disappeared during evening strolls. People whispered in tight circles, suspicious of every teenage boy with restless eyes. The market women, once jovial, now clutched their purses tighter. Even at church, announcements about the growing menace among our youths became more frequent. Robin and Marcus listened, unseen among the congregation, their faces masks of innocence. They had learned not just to steal, but to blend, to vanish into the very community they wounded. Yet, behind the casual grins and shrugged shoulders, an unseen line was being crossed, a line that once passed would turn mischief into something far darker. A line even they, in their foolishness, didn't realize they were nearing. When the university admission letters finally arrived, it felt like a second chance, a small crack of light in an otherwise darkening path. Robin and Marcus, against many expectations, had secured places in two different institutions not far from home. Their mother danced in the compound that afternoon, her wrapper flaring as she boasted to anyone who would listen that her boys were finally entering the next level. Their father, meanwhile, remained seated under the mango tree, his gaze heavy, offering only a short nod. To him, admission wasn't redemption. It was simply another battlefield. Nonetheless, preparations began. Neighbors contributed a little here and there, an old mattress, second-hand pots, a battered suitcase. Robin and Marcus accepted these gifts with half-hearted thanks, their minds already racing beyond textbooks and classrooms. When the day came to leave, Mama Ejiro wept and prayed over them at the bus park, stuffing their pockets with transport fare and biscuits. Pa Ogedengbe stood apart, arms crossed, watching his sons board the rickety bus with a sinking feeling that he couldn't explain. The university campuses were sprawling worlds of noise and motion, filled with new faces and endless opportunities for freedom and for mischief. Robin took to it immediately. He walked with a new swagger, dressing in flashy clothes even when he couldn't afford them, pretending to belong to a life he hadn't yet earned. Marcus followed close behind, quieter but always complicit. Lectures bored them, rules annoyed them. It didn't take long before they noticed how easily things went missing in the hostels. Phones, chargers, wallets left carelessly by sleepy-eyed students after a night of partying. Robin suggested they hustle a little to survive. Marcus hesitated at first, but the hunger for quick cash, coupled with the memories of empty plates back home, wore him down. They started small, picking unattended phones and blending into crowds. With every stolen item sold at roadside markets, their pockets got heavier and their guilt lighter. Soon, lectures became rare visits rather than daily routines, and the dream their mother had wept over became little more than a disguise. The deeper they sank, the wider their circle grew. Robin made friends with students who were already knee-deep in campus theft rings, men with quick hands and quicker tempers. They taught the brothers how to move undetected, how to strip laptops of trackers, how to lie with faces so convincing that even friends would swear they were innocent. The money came faster now, enough for drinks, for flashy clothes, for hotel stays. Marcus began sending small cash gifts home, lying that he had won scholarships. Their mother bragged loudly at church about how her sons were doing well in school. But the truth was rotting beneath the surface. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was organized and growing bolder with each success. Still, they felt untouchable. After all, who would suspect the boys from the small, struggling family? But pride has a way of opening doors to ruin, and unknown to them, the choices they made in those early days were planting seeds that would grow into a harvest of unimaginable sorrow. It was a humid Friday evening when Robin first heard about the house on the outskirts of town, a modest bungalow owned by a middle-aged couple known for their quiet lives and their modest wealth. Word had it that the man ran a small import business and rarely deposited his earnings at the bank. The information came through one of Robin's new acquaintances, a gaunt-faced boy called Stone, who claimed to have seen stacks of naira through the open windows on several occasions. The plan was simple, or so it seemed. Break in when the couple was expected to be out for a night vigil, grab whatever they could, and disappear before dawn. Robin, hungry for a bigger score, convinced Marcus to join, assuring him it would be quick and clean. Marcus hesitated longer than usual, but eventually agreed, silenced by the dream of finally having enough money to step away from petty theft. As night fell, they masked their faces with black cloths and rode borrowed motorcycles through abandoned back roads toward a future they couldn't yet see unraveling. Things didn't go according to plan. The couple, contrary to the information they received, was home that night. As the brothers forced their way through a side window, the man, hearing the noise, came down with a flashlight. There was a brief scuffle in the dim hallway, the kind where panic and poor decisions mix like fire and gasoline. Robin, jittery and aggressive, struck first, hitting the man over the head with a heavy metal torch they had brought for light. The woman screamed, and Marcus, desperate to silence her, shoved her backward. She hit her head on a sharp edge of the stair railing. Silence fell almost immediately, heavy and absolute. Blood pooled where the couple lay. In a daze, the brothers grabbed what little they could: phones, a bag of cash hidden under the stairwell, a few pieces of jewelry, and fled into the darkness, their hearts hammering against their ribs like wild drums. Neither spoke on the ride back. Their hands were sticky with the memory of something they could never undo. Morning brought more than sunlight. It brought sirens and whispers, fear and mourning. News of the couple's death spread like wildfire across the town. Investigators swarmed the house, finding fingerprints, partial shoe prints, and witnesses who had seen unfamiliar motorcycles near the property. Within days, names began to surface, first Stone's, then others, and finally Robin and Marcus. The arrest was swift and brutal. Dragged from their hostile rooms, the brothers were paraded before a sea of cameras and angry neighbors. Back home, Mama Ejiro collapsed when the news reached her, wailing so loudly that women from adjoining compounds had to hold her up. Pa Okading, however, didn't move, didn't speak. He simply picked up a small hand radio he always kept by his side and turned up the volume, drowning out the world with the scratchy voices of strangers. In that moment, the line that had always threatened to snap between them, between husband and wife, between parents and children, finally broke, scattering them like leaves in a storm none of them would survive whole. The days that followed the arrest were thick with shame and accusation. Neighbors who once nodded politely at Mama Ejiro now crossed to the other side of the street when they saw her coming. Children whispered cruel songs about thieves' mother under their breath, giggling until an adult hushed them with a sharp look. The compound, once alive with the hum of everyday living, fell into a heavy, bitter silence. At night, the wind carried snatches of conversations from distant corners, whispers about how everything had been seen coming, how the signs were there, how Mama Ejiro's blindness had cost her family everything. She stayed mostly indoors now, crouched near the window, flinching at every passing voice. Pa Okading, on the other hand, withdrew to the unfinished shed at the back of the house, sleeping on a wooden bench rather than share a bed with the woman he now looked at with open contempt. The distance between them became a chasm no apology could cross. Court proceedings began slow and grinding. Each hearing peeled away another layer of the family's dignity. Journalists, eager for a scandal to feed on, took photos of Mama Ejiro sitting outside the courthouse with her wrapper pulled tightly around her, face hollowed by exhaustion and grief. Pa Ogedengbe never attended. Instead, he spent his days in the market, pretending not to hear when people called him the father of murderers. The house they once built together, full of dreams and small victories, became a battlefield of cold glances and slamming doors. Arguments flared over the smallest things. Who left the gate open? Who used the last matchstick? Who failed to replace the drinking water? But underneath the pettiness was a deeper war, a furious blame that no words could settle. Pa Ogdeng accused her silently with his eyes, while Mama Ejiro defended herself to an audience of empty chairs and peeling walls. In the end, there was no grand explosion, only the slow, painful disintegration of something that once resembled a family. Eventually, the separation became official, though no court papers were filed. Pa Ogdeng packed a small bag one morning, took his tools, and left without a backward glance. Mama Ejiro sat on the porch as he walked away, her hands trembling in her lap, but her pride kept her mouth shut. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains, some shaking their heads, others nodding as if to say it was bound to happen. Inside the now half-empty house, the air felt thicker, heavier. Dust began to collect in corners that were once cleaned weekly. Letters from the court piled on the floor, unopened and ignored. And somewhere deep inside her, Mama Ejiro finally understood, not in the dramatic way that movies portray, but in the quiet, suffocating realization that comes when there's no one left to fight for. Her boys were locked behind bars. Her husband was gone. And she was left alone, haunted by choices that once seemed harmless, but had bloomed into something monstrous, devouring everything she once called her own. Robin and Marcus entered prison with bravado stitched into their skin, pretending it was just another storm they could laugh through. But prison peeled away masks faster than they could rebuild them. The walls smelled of sweat, metal, and decay. The air carried an invisible weight that pressed on their chests day and night. The cells were overcrowded. The beds were no more than thin mats tossed on cracked concrete floors, and food was a watery mess that barely passed for nourishment. Robin fought often, picking scabs off old wounds and nursing fresh ones with clenched jaws. Marcus, less confrontational, found himself shrinking, observing the rules of a brutal world where weakness was currency spent fast. Time, which used to slip by unnoticed in their reckless lives, now crawled like a wounded animal. Days melted into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly, the realization dug deep into their bones. This was no place they could escape with clever smiles or quick feet. This was their new reality, and it had no mercy for boys who thought themselves untouchable. Letters from home became rare as the months stretched into years. In the beginning, Mama Ejiro wrote often, long rambling letters filled with promises that she was praying, hoping, fasting for their return. She sent small parcels, soap, Gary, sometimes a cheap pair of slippers. But over time, even her words dried up. The visits, once monthly, became scattered memories, until eventually they stopped altogether. Robin pretended not to care, claiming that they didn't need anyone. Their family was a scam anyway. But Marcus carried the silence like a stone in his chest, heavy and inescapable. Sometimes, after lights out, he would stare into the darkness and wonder about their siblings, about the house they had abandoned to shame. His mind often drifted to their father, not in anger, but in a growing understanding of the man's despair. Prison was a slow teacher, stripping away the lies they had fed themselves. Every scar they bore, every friendship betrayed inside those walls, taught them one painful truth. The life they had once chased had only led them into a cage, with no easy way out. Meanwhile, the world outside moved on. Mama Ejiro, once proud and fiery, had been reduced to surviving by whatever means necessary. It began with borrowing, then begging, and finally selling what little dignity she had left. Men came and went, offering crisp notes for fleeting moments of comfort. She built a fragile existence around secrecy and shame, convincing herself it was temporary, that she was only doing what she must until her boys came back. But deep down, the cracks in her spirit widened with each passing night. Pa Ogading, in his corner of the city, nursed a bitterness that hardened into something cold and unreachable. He no longer spoke of his sons, no longer corrected those who said he had none. 9 years passed this way, years spent rotting in separate cages, each of them locked away not just by metal bars or broken dreams, but by the irreversible choices they had made, each ticking moment a reminder of what was lost and could never be reclaimed. The day Robin and Marcus stepped out of the prison gates, the world looked unfamiliar, as if it had shifted in their absence. The sun was harsher, the streets noisier, and the faces around them carried an indifference they had not expected. There was no one waiting with open arms, no warm homecoming like the ones Robin had stubbornly fantasized about during endless nights behind bars. Instead, there was only a long, dusty road stretching ahead, empty and uncertain. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of freedom almost as heavy as the chains they had shed. Robin's shoulders were squared, his jaw set tight with a stubbornness that prison had not managed to crush. Marcus, however, moved with caution, his steps slower, as though the ground itself might betray him. They didn't speak about what was next, not yet. In that fragile, trembling space between captivity and whatever came after, they each clung to their own version of hope, as frayed and tattered as it was. Marcus wasted no time once they settled in a cramped room at the edge of the town, a place rented with the little money saved from years of odd prison labor. The walls were bare, the mattress on the floor thin and uneven, but to Marcus it was a starting point. He woke early each morning, walking for miles under the unforgiving sun, asking at mechanics' workshops if they needed an extra hand. Many times he was turned away, sneered at, or asked uncomfortable questions about where he had been all these years. Yet he returned the next day, and the day after that, until finally a tired old man with grease-stained fingers agreed to let him apprentice without pay. Marcus didn't argue. He scrubbed engine parts, fetched water, swept floors, whatever was needed. Each grease stain on his shirt, each calloused finger felt like a step toward rebuilding a life from the ruins. In the evenings, he sat outside their room, sketching rough plans for a small shop he dreamed of opening one day, a dream so modest it barely seemed worth the hope it required. But still, he hoped. Robin, on the other hand, sat indoors, peering through the battered window as if expecting fortune to wander by and knock. He spoke often of opportunities, of connections, but never left the house to chase them. He believed luck owed him a great turn, that after suffering so much, life would somehow pay him back without asking for sweat or sacrifice. Job offers Marcus brought home were dismissed with scorn. Robin said he was meant for bigger things, not to slave under people like a fool. Days turned into weeks, and Robin's restlessness festered. He borrowed money from neighbors, with promises he couldn't keep, fell in with old faces from their darker days, and dreamt of shortcuts to riches that no longer existed. Marcus watched, heart heavy, knowing he couldn't carry his brother into a future that Robin refused to walk toward. As twilight fell each evening, the two brothers sat side by side in their silent room, one carving a hard, narrow path toward redemption, the other sinking deeper into the quicksand of lost chances. The first time Marcus confronted Mama Ejiro after their release, it was not the tearful reunion he had once imagined in the lonely corners of his prison nights. She looked smaller now, thinner, with lines carved deep into her face that hadn't been there before. Her hair, once thick and wrapped tightly in colorful scarves, was mostly gray, tucked hurriedly under a faded head tie. She sat on a cracked plastic chair outside a tiny rented room, picking at the hem of her wrapper as Marcus approached. When their eyes met, something sharp twisted in his chest. It wasn't the anger he had rehearsed for years. It was something softer, sadder, almost pity. She rose shakily to hug him, but he stepped back slightly, leaving her hands suspended awkwardly in the air. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. His voice was low, steady, almost too calm as he asked the questions that had haunted him in his darkest nights. Why had she never stopped them? Why had she taken the money, knowing where it came from? Mama Ejiro stammered through weak defenses, her eyes darting away from his. She said she thought she was helping, that she only wanted them to have what she couldn't give. But even as the words left her mouth, she seemed to deflate, as if the truth, once spoken aloud, robbed her of any remaining strength. The conversation didn't heal anything. It only laid bare the wounds they all carried, festering and untreated. Marcus left her there after a long, heavy silence, walking back to the room he now shared with Robin, with a heart heavier than when he entered prison. Days passed, and Mama Ejiro didn't visit. Marcus learned through murmurs that she had moved from man to man over the years, exchanging comfort for survival, patching her life with fragile promises that never held. In the market, women whispered about her when they thought she wasn't listening. In the streets, younger girls snickered behind her back. The fierce, proud woman who once fought neighbors over her sons was now just another forgotten face among the crowd, worn down by years of poor choices and stubborn pride. There was no grand downfall, no public disgrace, only the slow erosion of dignity, the quiet disintegration of someone who had once believed love alone could shield her from consequences. Marcus mourned her in his own way, not through tears, but through a cold understanding that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Robin predictably refused to visit her. When Marcus suggested they go together one evening, Robin laughed bitterly and waved him off. She made her choices, he said, and we paid the price. It wasn't just anger in his voice. It was a deep, raw resentment that no amount of time could seem to soften. Robin's bitterness festered, poisoning any sliver of forgiveness that might have survived. He spoke of dreams still, grand, glittering dreams where he became rich without effort, where he proved everyone wrong, but now his words sounded hollow, even to Marcus. Their mother remained a ghost at the edge of their lives, a reminder of the roots that had twisted them into the men they now were. Marcus moved forward, slowly, painfully, one scraped knuckle at a time. Robin remained rooted in place, a prisoner of his own refusal to heal. And somewhere behind the cracked door of her lonely room, Mama Ejiro sat each night staring into the darkness, whispering prayers that sounded less like hope and more like regret. Robin's days soon became a cycle of empty hours and restless nights filled with half-sketched plans and conversations with men who promised more than they could deliver. He moved through the town like a ghost, clinging to a world that no longer existed, refusing every honest job that came his way. Marcus often found him lounging on the broken steps of their building, spinning tales about a big deal that was almost ready. A mysterious friend who just needed a little more time to come through. His eyes, once sharp and mischievous, now carried a glazed impatience, as though the universe itself had wronged him. Marcus, weary of arguing, chose silence most times, only watching as Robin grew more reckless. In Robin's mind, suffering had earned him a shortcut, an unspoken reward that the world owed him. To work for pennies, to bow under someone else's command, felt to him like betrayal, betrayal of the life he still believed he deserved. As the months stumbled by, Robin's decisions worsened. He borrowed money he had no intention of repaying, made promises he couldn't keep, and gambled away small handouts meant for food. He returned home at odd hours, smelling of cheap alcohol and desperation. Each loss only deepened his conviction that success was just one step away, that he needed only a single lucky break to rise above it all. When he spoke to Marcus, it was always with a strange, bitter pride, as though refusing to labor like a common man somehow made him better. Opportunities passed him by like impatient strangers, but he remained rooted in place, waiting for a destiny that was never coming. Some nights, Marcus would hear him pacing their tiny room, muttering to himself about deals, about the people who had cheated him, about how one day they would all regret doubting him. It was not ambition that filled Robin anymore. It was a desperate clinging to a fantasy that the world had already moved past. The final crack came on a sweltering afternoon when Robin was caught trying to scam a woman selling second-hand clothes at the local market. His plan was clumsy, built more on arrogance than cunning. He attempted to switch a wad of worthless paper for real money, but the woman, sharp-eyed and furious, raised an alarm before he could slip away. A crowd gathered quickly, their anger swift and merciless. By the time the police arrived, Robin's lip was split and his shirt torn at the seams. This time, there were no sympathetic faces, no blind mother to defend him, no father to scold and then forgive. He was dragged away, bleeding and cursing, a broken man clinging to broken dreams. Marcus watched from a distance, unable to intervene, heart hammering with helpless sorrow. He knew, in that heavy moment, that Robin had crossed into a place beyond rescue, a place where regret would come too late, if it ever came at all. Years slipped by in quiet, uncelebrated moments. Marcus, still carrying the bruises of the past deep inside him, planted his feet firmly in the rough soil of redemption. He rose before the sun each day, washing cars, repairing old motorcycles, running errands for spare change, whatever honest work his hands could find. Slowly, through calloused palms and aching backs, he saved enough to buy second-hand tools. With patience like slow-growing roots, he opened a small workshop under a rusted zinc shed by the roadside. At first, only a few customers dared trust the ex-convict, but over time, Marcus' steady work and quiet sincerity spoke louder than his past. He became a fixture in the town, not celebrated, but respected, like a stubborn tree that had survived too many storms. There were days he still woke sweating from dreams of prison, from echoes of Robin's bitter voice, but he shook them off and pressed forward. The future he was building was not grand or dazzling, but it was his, built one hard-earned coin at a time. It was during a rainy evening, the streets silvered with water, that Pa Ogedeng returned. His hair had thinned, and his back hunched more now, but his eyes were unchanged, sharp, wary, heavy with unsaid things. He didn't announce himself. He simply showed up at Marcus' workshop, stood by the entrance with his arms folded, and watched. Marcus, wiping grease from his hands, looked up and froze. For a long moment, neither spoke, the rain filling the empty space between them. Then, without ceremony, Pa Ogedeng walked to the nearest bench and sat down, as if he had been expected all along. They didn't speak of the past, of Robin or Mama Ejiro, or the cracked walls of the home they lost. Instead, they sat side by side, watching cars splash through puddles, the silent presence of father and son, a fragile thread stitching something broken back together. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a silent agreement that some wounds didn't need words to start healing. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, in another cramped prison cell, Robin lay staring at the cracked ceiling, the years pressing down on him heavier than any sentence written by a judge. His dreams, once so loud, had withered into small, bitter regrets. Mama Ejiro, aged and forgotten by many, lived quietly in a rented room tucked behind the market. She spoke little now, her voice brittle and small, spending her days in silent prayers, some of which she barely believed anymore. In the town where it all began, life moved on. Children played in the dust. New houses rose where old ones crumbled. And amid it all, Marcus worked each day with quiet hands and a steady heart, not because he expected applause or rewards, but because he had finally understood something that neither prison nor loss could steal. True redemption wasn't a single grand moment. It was 100 small choices made in silence, a road paved one humble step after another, leading out of the shadows into the stubborn, beautiful light. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.